Hello, I'm Vangela M. Wade, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Justice. We are so honored that you've joined us this evening for Mississippi on the Lake. You know, Mississippi and Chicago are intricately connected, just as the leaves to the trees, as the blood pulsating through our veins, and just as family is genetically mapped over the generations. There's no wonder that in any given conversation with folks in Mississippi or in Chicago, there's a thread of family or kindred, friends, acquaintances, less than 6 degrees of separation. From 1914 to 1970, thousands of African Americans left Mississippi, bound for northern cities. This we know as the Great Migration, during which time more than 6 million African Americans fled the South for northern cities. And Chicago was a destination city for those looking for a safer, better life. The Great Migration stands as a dramatic response to the injustices and violence of the Jim Crow South. We know all too well the legacy of Jim Crow in Mississippi and its various manifestations across our nation. Since 2003, MCJ has worked to create a more equitable and just Mississippi, a better Mississippi, through our dedicated legal campaigns centered around health and public benefits, fair housing, consumer protection, immigration, disaster recovery, impact litigation. And we have an exceptional track record for making real positive change. Unfortunately, we all know that the systemic assault against the rights of the oppressed, disenfranchised, and the poor won't end anytime soon. There is always more work to do. And tonight, you will hear firsthand about some of the most incredible work, the work of MCJ's attorneys and advocates, the work that we're doing, accomplishing the things we're accomplishing on behalf of underrepresented communities across Mississippi. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us this evening. And before we get started, I'd like to introduce our host for this evening. As I mentioned, a conversation can lead you to a Mississippi-Chicago connection. Our two hosts present a prime example of the Mississippi-Chicago connection. I want to introduce to some of you and just bring to the forefront our hosts, Bonnie Allen and Aviva Futorian. In 2005, Bonnie Allen took a plane from Kalamazoo, Michigan to Jackson, Mississippi to lend her assistance to the Hurricane Katrina recovery efforts. Martha Bergmark had created MCJ just 2 years before Katrina, and MCJ had quickly established itself as a major player in the recovery effort. Bonnie gravitated to MCJ because she knew Martha through their work together at the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. Bonnie is currently the CEO of the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and someone who over this past year I've called on many times for her wise counsel. Hello, Bonnie, and welcome to our event this evening.
Thank you, Vangela.
Our next host, of course, is Aviva Futorian, and I've told Aviva a number of times that she is one of my heroes for the courage that she exhibited, during her time in Mississippi during the Mississippi Freedom Summer when she taught in the Freedom School in 1964. She had been a high school teacher at that time in suburban Chicago, but she ventured on down to Mississippi. At the end of the summer, Cleve Sellers of SNCC asked her to stay on as a civil rights worker in Benton County, Mississippi, where she stayed until the beginning of 1996. As a result of her experience in Mississippi, Aviva decided to go to law school to become a civil rights lawyer. An attorney now based in Chicago, representing death row inmates. Aviva's work also includes activism related to the abolition of the death penalty in Illinois. She is co-author of Voices from the Mississippi Hill Country, Benton County, and is board chair of the Hill County Project. Good evening, Abiba, and welcome. Thank you both so much for hosting this event with the Mississippi Center for Justice, and I look forward to hearing from each of you later in our program. So, how important is MCJ to equity in Mississippi? A better Mississippi? Let me show you. Earlier, you heard me mention impact litigation. That's not necessarily a term that everyone is familiar with. MCJ's impact litigation team tackles the big issues around racial and economic justice, including voting rights, reproductive rights, prison conditions, and access to justice. With us this evening is MCJ's Director of the George Riley Impact Litigation Initiative, Mr. Rob McDuff. Rob is one of the founders of MCJ back in 2003, and he served as vice chair of the board for many years. He joined the staff in 2017 to be the director of the new George Riley Impact Litigation Initiative. Rob, how are you this evening?
Fine, Angela. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, Rob, one of the important features of MCJ is our ability to confront Mississippi's pathology of injustice as it arises across a variety of issues and cases. And we'll discuss some of those tonight. One of the cases or the issues that's on the forefront of most folks, on the minds of most folks across not only Mississippi, but the nation, is what happened this past Tuesday when the Supreme Court agreed to hear a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. This is the first abortion ban case that the court will hear since Roe. Proponents of the ban made no secret that Mississippi passed this law as a test case to overturn Roe. Rob, we're in the middle of the case, and it's become extremely important to the entire country. Please tell us about it.
Yes, and good evening, everyone. We have represented Mississippi's only abortion clinic for several years now in a series of challenges to the seemingly endless parade of laws passed by the Mississippi legislature in an effort to restrict a woman's right to choose. These restrictions fall particularly heavily on women in poverty, in this, the poorest state in the union, a disproportionate number of whom are Black in this state, which has the highest percentage of Black people of any of the 50 states. And one of these is a ban on abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. It was passed in 2018, and along with our friends at the Center for Reproductive Rights, we immediately went to court and secured an order prohibiting that law from taking effect, pursuant to precedent going all the way back to Roe versus Wade. State of Mississippi appealed. The Court of Appeals affirmed that decision. And then the state asked the United States Supreme Court to take the case, which they did just a few days ago. This appeal is a direct challenge to the reasoning of Roe versus Wade, which is that prior to viability, the decision about whether to go forward with a pregnancy belongs to the woman, not the government. Unfortunately, that's what the Supreme Court is going to be reviewing. Now, we will work with our colleagues in an effort to persuade the court to respect and adhere to the precedent and the reasoning of Roe versus Wade. A year ago, in a case out of Louisiana, Chief Justice Roberts joined what then were the 4 progressive members of the court to uphold precedent and strike down a Louisiana law that made it more difficult in certain situations for women in Louisiana to receive abortions. But of course, the landscape has changed dramatically in the last year because of the retirement of Justice Ginsburg and the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett. Now, if the Supreme Court does not adhere to precedent and does strike down Mississippi's law, it will be a severe blow. It might be possible for them to do it without completely overruling Roe versus Wade, maybe only partially overruling it, but this is a very alarming development. Given that it has happened, of course, we are glad to be part of the effort to protect this fundamental right and do the best we can to get out of this case before the Supreme Court with as much of it intact as possible.
Well, Rob, I know all eyes are on this case, and I know the court won't hear it until the first part of 2022. Is that right?
Well, they'll probably hear it. We probably have an argument maybe in November, possibly December. We will not have a decision until sometime in the first half of 2022, certainly by the end of the term in late June.
Well, we'll certainly keep watch. Now, there's another case of national importance that we've recently joined. Tell us about that. I can't wait till you give the style of the case.
Yes, we have joined as co-counsel for the plaintiff in the case of Thompson versus Trump, a lawsuit against the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, Rudy Giuliani, and Donald Trump over the January 6th invasion of the Capitol brought by Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi. He's the lead plaintiff in the case, the chair of the Homeland Security Committee of the House. It has been joined by 10 other members of Congress, and it's a suit against those 4 defendants under the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, which, among other things, prohibits conspiracies to interfere with federal officials in the discharge of their duties, which is exactly what the members of Congress were trying to do that day to approve the electoral vote count. So it's going to be a fascinating case, very interesting case, filed in Washington, D.C. in federal court.
Okay. Well, another case for us and our supporters to keep our eyes on. Now, I know, as I mentioned earlier, impact litigation covers not only these cases of extraordinary importance, but as well as voting rights. Tell us what you see on the horizon. Well, first of all, what we've been involved in most recently regarding voting rights, and what you see on the horizon for MCJ, particularly after we get the census data for Mississippi.
Well, yeah, Mississippi has a long history of infringing on the rights of Black people to vote, beginning with the post-Reconstruction Constitution of 1890, which was designed for the purpose of taking the vote away from the newly freed slaves who were Black in Mississippi. And it was done primarily with poll taxes, literacy tests, understanding clauses. And those have all fortunately gone by the wayside with federal court decisions in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But there are 2 provisions relating to voting of that Constitution that have still been in place. One of them was the law disfranchising permanently felons who committed certain crimes that were considered to be Black crimes by the 1890 framers. We are in the midst of a challenge to that law. And then the second was a very complicated version of the Electoral College for statewide office in Mississippi that was designed as a hedge to prevent the possibility of a Black person being elected to statewide office. And we sued over that. That lawsuit actually led to the repeal of that particular provision. But we, we're still fighting on the felon disfranchisement case. And we've sued last year to expand absentee voting in Mississippi in light of COVID. And what's around the corner is the massive effort we're going to be involved in with respect to the redistrictings of election districts for state legislature, county governing boards, city councils around the state that will occur in the wake of the publication of the specifics of the 2020 census.
Wow. Rob, I've been in awe of you and your legal expertise, skill for a long time. And it's amazing to just hear just a summary of the work that you're doing as you lead MCJ's impact litigation. Now, one particular case that certainly grabbed national attention over several months, and that's the case of Curtis Flowers. And I know for those of our viewers who may not be familiar with that case, I can certainly direct them to a 60 Minutes episode featuring you and Mr. Flowers. But tell us about that case and why it was important for MCJ to step into that case.
Well, that case out of the small town of Winona, Mississippi is unprecedented in American legal history, because Curtis Flowers was tried 6 times for capital murder and spent 23 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Now, 2 of those trials ended up in hung juries and mistrials. The other 4 resulted in convictions and death sentences, each of which was overturned because of the misconduct of District Attorney Doug Evans. And most recently, the conviction, death sentence in the 6th trial was overturned by the US Supreme Court because of what it called the, quote, relentless and determined effort to rid the jury of Black individuals, end quote, by the prosecutor. And this was done through his peremptory challenges over the 6 trials of the 42 Black people who came up. He struck 41 of them. This was part of a history of his that went back for 26 years, in which over the course of those years, he struck Black people from the jury 4 times more, or was 4 times more likely to strike Black people than white people. We took this case because it was clear Curtis Flowers is innocent. It was clear he had been railroaded, and because of the importance of the issues of racial discrimination and of prosecutorial misconduct that were highlighted by the case. Now, we got in I was brought in to lead the defense after the US Supreme Court reversed the verdict in the 6th trial to prepare for a potential 7th trial. And we immediately filed a motion for bail. We immediately filed a motion to recuse the prosecutor because of his misconduct. And I bet, I went and met Curtis Flowers for the first time at Parchman. And I walked away from that saying, this man could not have committed this crime. He's one of the nicest people you will ever meet, had a nearly spotless prison record. And when we argued that motion for bail in front of the Mississippi trial judge after the case was sent back by the US Supreme Court, we pointed out that he was, the case against Curtis Flowers never made sense because it was a murder of 4 people with precision shooting, clearly committed by a professional criminal or criminals. And they arrested a 23-year-old gospel singer with no criminal record and nothing in his history to indicate that he had the inclination or the ability to commit a crime like this, as compared to many others who had serious criminal records who should have been investigated in that case. At the end of the hearing, the judge granted bail, and that afternoon, December 16, 2019, Curtis Flowers was released and left prison for the first time in 23 years. 3 weeks later, the district attorney, in the face of our motion to recuse him, stepped down. The Mississippi Attorney General was appointed in his place, and we set out on a campaign to persuade her to dismiss the charges altogether, which she did in September of 2019. And there you see Curtis on the night the charges were dismissed. He was on a Zoom call with all of his lawyers, and he was allowed to remove the ankle bracelet that he had since he had been released on bail. So he is doing very well now. This is a picture of him on the 60 Minutes episode. He is doing very well now. He has a very supportive family, which really kept him sane through those 23 years in prison. He's a remarkably well-balanced person. And fortunately, the time in prison did not take that away from him, and he's moving forward.
Very good. So there's always the rainbow, and I at the end of the storm, and that is definitely what we see with Mr. Flowers. So thank you so much, Rob, for giving us that update and for your wonderful work always on behalf of MCJ. I want to move now to immigration and our director of the immigration campaign, Miss Amelia McGowan. Amelia, how are you this evening?
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. So just want to give an update on what we're doing in the immigration campaign. So I'm sure most of you remember those horrific 2019 ICE raids that happened in central Mississippi. During those raids, the US government thrust most of the 680 Mississippians it arrested into removal, or what we used to call deportation proceedings. And nearly 2 years after those raids, we estimate that over 200 workers have already been deported. And the rest continue to remain in legal limbo, and they likely will for years, as they face the possibility of permanent removal from their families and communities, and even exposure to danger and death. So before I get into kind of the mechanics of these proceedings, I want to show you just a glimpse of what these proceedings are like.
Are you a little nervous this morning? See? Do you understand what these proceedings here in court are all about? You know what a lawyer is? No? Do you have a lawyer? No?
So as you can see, people facing deportation, children and adults alike, fight within a system that's absolutely designed for them to fail. They're thrown into an adversarial process, as you can see in the video, and they face an ICE prosecutor and an often hostile judge, much meaner than this one. And if they can't afford a private attorney or they can't find pro bono counsel, they have to navigate these proceedings alone, in English, and sometimes from detention. In addition, immigration courts and immigration policy, as we know, are heavily politicized and subject to the whims of the president. People seeking persecution and protection from persecution and torture, like asylum seekers, often suffer the most. Under President Trump, asylum seekers and refugees suffered over 90 separate policies eroding procedural and substantive protections, and that's more than any other group of non-citizens. And while Biden has reversed course on some of these harmful policies, he's failed to take action on many others. But despite this difficult landscape, MCJ is actively fighting back, thanks in large part to your support. There are partnerships with pro bono attorneys nationwide. Our team has been able to offer free merits and appellate representation to 118 raids-impacted Mississippians. That's everybody who requested an attorney and agreed to sign up on our waiting list. And that ensures they don't have to face this daunting process alone. Also, in our partnership with Aiken Gump, our virtual DACA clinic has also provided free legal representation to Mississippi Dreamers. And that removes this threat of deportation for them and provides them with legal protection to work, study, and thrive in our state. And finally, we're seeking stronger protections and safeguards for Mississippians seeking protection from persecution and torture. And that includes many who are facing removal as a result of the ICE raids. We're the only nonprofit in Mississippi focusing on representation and advocacy for asylum seekers, and we're only one of a few in the region. And in addition to our individual representation, our asylum work has reached a regional and even nationwide scale. Because of our unique appellate representation of asylum seekers, we've secured Board of Immigration Appeals and Federal Circuit Court victories that fortify protections far beyond our individual clients. And in addition, our asylum work has earned us an active role in the nationwide asylum working group. And that's let us join organizations like the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the American Immigration Council to advocate for policies to restore and expand the United States commitment to protecting people fleeing persecution and torture. And so even though the immigration landscape remains difficult, we are not shying away from tough battles. And despite these challenges, we remain committed to fighting for the policies that welcome and respect the rights of immigrant Mississippians. And we want to thank you for your continued support in making this work possible.
Now, Amelia, I am, it's the work that MCJ has done, that you've done following the ICE raids is just remarkable. There is a case that you've recently become involved in related to having to do with the H-2A visa. Could you tell us more about that case and how you anticipated impacting Mississippi?
Absolutely. This case has been a great opportunity for team collaboration among our impact, immigration, and consumer protection teams. We joined up with Southern Migrant Legal Services to file suit on behalf of 2 South African migrant workers, and they suffered labor exploitation in the Delta. So in this case, a Winona farmer hired our clients as farm workers under this visa program that you mentioned, Angel, the H-2A Temporary Agricultural Visa Program. And they offered them what's called the prevailing wage as required by the government for agricultural work. When the farmer applied for these workers to get these visas, he certified to the US government that he couldn't find enough US workers willing and able to take those jobs. And that's going to become important in a second. But when our clients arrived to the United States to work, they found a much different story. So instead of getting farm work as they were promised and originally hired, the farmer made our clients drive trucks to farms across the Southeast for a staggering 95 hours a week on average. But he still paid them the wages of farm workers. In doing so, he denied them the 40% higher prevailing wage of truck drivers. And so our suit exposes these and challenges these practices and sends a clear message to employers that all Mississippians have a right to a fair wage, regardless of their immigration status. But in addition to immigrants, this program also harms U.S. workers. So I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague Ty to talk about that impact.
Thank you, Amelia. And I think that was in North Mississippi, Winona, but down deeper in the Delta, we know that farming is a significant part of life in the Mississippi Delta. Over 100 farm owners in the Delta are taking advantage of the H-2A Temporary Agricultural Visa Program, which is okay. The program exists to help farmers. Unfortunately, many of them are abusing the program and exploiting not only H-2A workers, but also US citizens in the Delta who are usually Black and poor. Under the H-2A visa program, when a farm owner hires an H-2A worker, he has to also hold that job open to a US citizen worker. And if the US citizen applies and is qualified, he must hire him or her first. Additionally, if the farm owner employs both an H-2A worker and a US citizen worker, he has to pay them both the prevailing wage. Just over the past 2 months, in 3 counties in the Delta, encompassing 7 farms, we have identified nearly 20 US citizen farm workers who have come forward about potential violations regarding wage rates and equal treatment. Earlier, Amelia mentioned that the minimum hourly wage set by the federal government for agricultural work under the H-2A visa program is $11.33 an hour. Over the past several months, I have met and interviewed local US citizens, local community members in the Delta, farm workers who are being paid as little as $7.25 an hour, compared to the $11.33 an hour that they should be getting. Now, here's where it gets even messier. When we think of H-2A workers, we usually imagine workers from places like South America, for example, Mexico. Well, in this instance, in the Delta, the H-2A workers are not from South America. I've driven up and down Highway 61 and Highway 49 here in the Delta, and I see white workers driving farm equipment out in the fields. And many assume these are family members of white farm owners, but in actuality, many of them are white South Africans who have been brought in under the H-2A visa program. Although the Mississippi Delta has one of the highest unemployment rates in the country, one of the highest poverty rates in the country, farm owners in the Delta claim they can't find people to work on their farms. But it's just not true. It's just not true. Local community members, especially Black people in the Delta, have been doing farm work for generations. What's really happening can be shown in a situation I encountered a few weeks ago when I interviewed a local Black farm worker in Sunflower County in Indianola. And let's call him Greg, just so that we don't reveal anyone. Greg informed me that he has been working on a particular farm for the past 24 years. And over recent years, he's been instructed by the farm owner, his boss, to train white South Africans to operate the farm equipment, the tractors, the cotton pickers, combines, and fertilizers. And Greg said he knows that other local workers who already know how to operate the equipment are also searching for work, but were not hired. And what adds insult to injury is that after Greg trained the white South African to operate the agricultural equipment, the white South African was paid more than Greg, even though they were doing the same job. Today, Greg makes $7.25 an hour.
Now, Ty, let me ask you this. When you talk about farmers, and I know, some people might have an idea or a picture in their head of farmers in Mississippi, but are you talking about the farmers that may own, 5 or 6 acres? They may have maybe a cow and a couple of chickens, or a bean patch or something of that nature. What type of farmers are these? What's the magnitude of their holdings, you think? Do you think?
I'm talking about, I grew up on the farm. My dad drove tractors for a living to raise me and my siblings. And we have family members all up in the Chicago area who come from farming. When I talk about farmers here in the Delta that are taking advantage of the H-2A visa process, I'm talking about farmers who own thousands and thousands of acres of land. 1,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 acres of land that stretch from down below at the bottom of the Delta in Vicksburg all the way up to Greenville and Clarksdale and Quitman County up in the north part of the Delta. So this is not a small thing where you have a farmer with 1 tractor and 1 cow that's taking advantage of 1 Black person. You're talking about farmers who are millionaires, who farm thousands and thousands of acres of land, and therefore affect the lives of citizens all over this region, all over the most poverty-stricken area in the country. And we know for a fact that, like I said before, farming drives the Mississippi Delta. It's people's livelihood, and they're taking that away from American citizens in some cases simply because they're Black, and these people don't have legal representation because they can't afford it.
Well, this is another case that we'll have to keep our eyes on. Thank you so much, Amelia and Ty. And Ty, I want to talk to you about your Justice Court Navigator work. As a son of the Delta, as you mentioned, being from Rolling Fork, Mississippi, you've served in the Army and in President Obama's White House before getting your law degree from Georgetown and coming back to Mississippi to serve the Delta communities by growing this program that we call the Delta Justice Court Navigator Project. Ty, what issues do low-income community members in Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta, face that make the Delta Justice Court Navigator program necessary? And can you also tell us what problems are we looking to resolve, and how effective has the program been so far?
Okay. For the past 8 months, I've driven over 16,000 miles up and down highways and back roads throughout the Mississippi Delta. The Delta is one of the poorest, regions in the United States. And I know this to be true because even though I have traveled the world, visiting over 23 countries, I was born and raised in poverty right here in the Delta. And this is specifically why, after retiring from the military, I attended law school, and after graduation, I applied for an Equal Justice Work Fellowship to work at the Mississippi Center for Justice. And as you mentioned, my fellowship is called the Delta Justice Navigator Program. And the program is particularly focused on ensuring people in low-income communities have equal access to the justice system. And here are a few statistics that I've gathered while visiting these communities over the past several months. I've sat in on over 300 civil cases in justice court. Nearly 80% of the defendants being hauled into justice court in those cases are Black women, and many of them single mothers. A staggering 99% of the defendants, these people I've seen in these low-income communities, appear for their justice court hearings with no legal representation. Conversely, over 70% of the companies, such as payday loan businesses, credit card companies, and medical facilities that are bringing these low-income community members into court, over 70% of them have a lawyer by their side. The common denominator here is representation. And that's what the Mississippi Center for Justice empowers me to work toward through the Delta Justice Court Navigator program. And week after week, I see the same four-step scenario play out in justice court in underserved communities throughout the Delta. One, low-income community member is hauled into court, confused and afraid with no legal representation. Two, a landlord or a company sends a high-powered lawyer to sue that community member. And three, the judge asks the community member simply, do you owe the bill? And the community member, four, not realizing that they have other options, simply says yes. And in the case of quick cash and payday loan businesses or credit card companies or a medical facility with a medical bill, the judge orders the community member to pay the sum in a few days or have their wages garnished. And the wage garnishment issue is significant because a lot of these community members, people are making on average less than $17,000 annually. Less than $17,000 annually. That's less than $2,000 a month, maybe around $1,400 a month. And the average wage garnishment in these civil cases is about 25% per paycheck. That's devastating for some of these people. And in the case of landlord and tenant issues, the judges will oftentimes approve an eviction to take place in a few days, so kicking people out in the streets.
Goodness. And what have you found when you've been in court observing these cases, particularly with the eviction during the pandemic, where people are needing to be housed for themselves and for their children who are often learning virtually?
Well, I'll share with you a real life example. It's one of the most painful and at the same time most rewarding days that I've sat in a justice court. In January, it was really cold here. And it was right before we had this, one of the rare winter storms, snowstorms in Mississippi. And earlier that morning, I had been passing out CDC eviction moratoriums at low-income apartment complexes in the city of Greenville. It's located in Washington County. What the CDC eviction moratorium said was, if a tenant cannot pay their rent because of a COVID-related circumstance, the landlord can't evict you while the moratorium is in place. So I would just stop by a random low-income housing area and apartment complex. I'd take the CDC eviction moratorium to a door, I'd knock and walk away. Well, later that day, still in Greenville, I was attending Washington County Justice Court. It was the last case of the day, and a short Black woman came forward and stood behind the defendant's podium. Her husband stood beside her. On the plaintiff's side stood a lawyer representing the landlord. The husband and wife couple had left their child with the neighbor that day so they could appear before the court. Months earlier, both parents had been previously infected with the coronavirus and couldn't go to work. And consequently, they couldn't pay the rent for a few months. And here's where it really gets painful. At this point in the case, there are essentially four parties in the courtroom. One, the judge. Two, the defendant, which is the mother and the father. Three, the plaintiff, the lawyer representing the landlord. And four, me sitting in observance. Everyone in the courtroom knew about the CDC eviction moratorium except the defendant, mother, and father. Even though I'm a lawyer, I couldn't say anything in court because I haven't taken the Mississippi bar exam because of the pandemic. I'm taking it in January. The judge couldn't say anything because the moratorium had to be completed before the court hearing and the judge had to remain neutral anyway. It wasn't in the best interest of the plaintiff, the landlord's lawyer, to say anything about it because the primary objective was to collect rent. So they were just there hanging on a limb by themselves. And the mother asked the judge if she could have 2 weeks to come up with the rent. The judge asked the landlord's lawyer if he agrees. The lawyer reluctantly said yes. I walked out of the courtroom. While I was standing outside on the sidewalk in the cold, the husband and wife came out of the building as well. I reached into my bag and grabbed a copy of the CDC eviction moratorium, which I was handing out earlier at low-income apartment complexes. And I gave one to the couple and explained to them that all they needed to do was read it, sign it, and hand it to the landlord. And he couldn't evict them in the middle of the pandemic. And I could see the weight lifted from their shoulders in that moment. And for me, that's what this work is all about. That's why I attended law school after retiring from the military. And that's why I came back to the Delta to work at the Mississippi Center for Justice. Because of the support of donors and partners, the Mississippi Center for Justice has provided me with so many necessary tools and resources to do this work in low-income communities. And I know it makes a difference because I'm one of those people from a poverty-stricken community. So I know every little bit counts. So thank you, Vangela, and thank you to the Mississippi Center for Justice for giving me an opportunity to give back to the communities that gave me so much.
And thank you, Ty, for the great work that you're doing over in the Mississippi Delta. And we look forward to see what's happening with the Justice Court Navigator Program over the next few months. Next, I bring to you all Riley Morris, who's our General Counsel at Mississippi Center for Justice. And Riley has with him special guests. And these guests, I tell you, the first time I met them, I was on a bus on a road trip that we sponsor with the Mississippi Center for Justice called the Great Mississippi Road Trip, where we ride through the Delta, through many of the great civil rights points, from Fannie Lou Hamer to Bryant Grocery, which you'll hear more about shortly, B.B. King Museum. We take a wonderful trip to show our supporters just what it's like to live in the Delta and to go through some of those areas that some of these the greats have tread. So Riley, can you bring forward our special guest for this evening?
Thank you, Evangeline. Yes, please allow me to introduce the wonderful husband and wife team, Dr. Marvell Parker and her husband, Wheeler Parker, who have accompanied NCJ on so many of its road trips, but in addition to that, have been tireless advocates to maintain and promote and protect the memory of Wheeler's cousin, Emmett Till. And we'll hear some more about that in a few minutes. But Marvell and Wheeler, it's wonderful to see you both again. Are y'all doing well?
We're doing fine. We survived the pandemic and we're ready to get out.
You're ready to get out too. So are we. We hope to see you soon. So for several years, MCJ and its partners have helped you to secure national protection for sites in Mississippi and in Chicago lately, connected to the tragedy of Emmett Till. And this year, a bill was introduced by Senator Duckworth and joined by Republican Senator from Mississippi, Roger Wicker, to declare a Chicago landmark as a national monument, the Roberts Temple. Could you tell us a little about the significance of Roberts Temple and what does the filing of this bill and the prospect of it being named a national monument mean to you?
Well, Roberts Temple, the significance of Roberts Temple is that in 1955, it was the site of the funeral of Emmett Till. The 3-day viewing attracted over 100,000 people coming out to try and view the mutilated body of the son of Mamie Till Mobley. And we commemorate her bravery in allowing the world to see the mutilated body of her son. And the historic significance of the Till funeral is that it is said that it is the catalyst that sparked the civil rights movement. In an interview of Rosa Parks, she stated that the day she did not give up her seat, it was because she thought about Emmett Till. And we know what happened as a result of her not giving up her seat in Alabama. So we're thankful for the legislature that's been introduced by Senator Tammy Duckworth and the two Mississippi Senator, I think it's Smith and Whitaker that signed on also. That was a pleasant surprise. And we're looking forward to our Roberts Temple becoming a national monument. And we really thank the Mississippi Center for Justice for the pro bono services that we've received from Mass Design Group and helping us to do an assessment of what needs to be done in order to renovate the church. We want to restore it to its 1955 visibility. We're going to first begin with stabilizing the present structure, and our next step is to secure or trying to secure funding for the renovation.
Well, it's a powerful story. Thank you so much. And Mass figures into the next thing I wanted to ask y'all about. Everyone at MCJ, I think, who went on the road trip will remember that 2 years ago, you two joined more than 100 people for the unveiling of a bulletproof memorial plaque at Gray Ball Landing near Glendora, Mississippi, where Emmett's body was recovered from the Tallahatchie River. And prior plaques had been shot up by vandals. Later this summer, you two and I and some others will be meeting again there to advise a nationally renowned design team led by the Mass Group on a memorial for the river site. So the question for me is, how do you think people are affected when they walk onto that riverbank? And what's your vision for that memorial structure?
Well, I've been privileged to see some of the proposed designs by the Mass Design Group for the river site, and each one is more awesome than the other. I know the feeling that I get, you know, when I'm there, physically there, after having read about the story and listened to Mamie tell the story of the murder and recovery of the body of her son. It's an awesome feeling to stand there and know that this tragedy took place and that God allowed his body to be recovered, because the way they disposed of his body, he should never have been found. But God allowed his body to surface, and for the little Hodges boy to be out fishing and saw his feet bobbing in the water, and thus the civil rights movement was sparked as a result of that.
And without that sign and without this memorial, people who might have taken a wrong turn and driven down that country road would simply have driven back past it, because it's just a tree-lined road on one side, and on the other side is a cotton field, and you cut through a little field and you get down to the riverbank. Yeah. But once you know the moment that occurred there, the moment that was a hinge in American civil rights history, it makes you tingle. Yeah, in a way. It's a very different feeling.
Yes, it is.
So talking for a moment about current events, John Lewis in a posthumous column wrote that Emmett Till was my George Floyd. That was a profound moment. And he said, we know that Emmett's murderers escaped punishment for their crimes, but one of Floyd's killers, Derek Chauvin, was recently convicted. How do you all feel about whether America is making progress to ensure Black Lives Matter? And what lesson does the Emmett Till tragedy continue to teach us today?
I think what it does, it keeps the story alive. I know it does with me, and made me dream was, I hope you didn't die alive. And in vain, I'm sorry, excuse me, in vain. And by us doing this, and the picture speaks 1,000 words. By me going to the river site, that thing brought things alive. I'm part of the story, but that impacted me. So, and I really want to appreciate you guys for what you're doing, and ask you to keep up the good works. And because people soon to forget, they'll forget and most people, a lot of people do not know the story. So this gives an opportunity to tell the story.
Thank you so much. Angela?
Thank you, Riley. Thank you, Reverend Parker, Dr. Parker. This is just a further example of a connection between Mississippi and Chicago, the legacy of Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley. Thank you all. Wow, I am awed by the work and the commitment of our advocates, our partners, our staff, And I want to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions of our staff and of the Parkers and of our wonderful hosts this evening. So if you have questions, please put your questions into the chat box and we will address them in the order in which they are received. I'm going to check the chat box. I need to put my glasses on to see if we have any questions popping in.
While we're waiting for a question, may I mention that the MASS group that's assisting this TIL project also led the design of the Montgomery, Alabama Monument to Peace and Justice put together by the Equal Justice Initiative, a compelling lynching memorial. And so it's just extraordinary to imagine that that same genius for design and provoking emotion is going to be added to the Grayball Landing.
I tell you, one of the experiences that I've had down at the landing, of course, was the last time we were there as a group, MCJ, in October of 2019, when we were there for the unveiling of the sign of the marker that had to be replaced after the previous one had been shot with rifles. We were standing there and I can remember this line of automobiles just like appeared out of nowhere as it started winding up through literally through the cotton field. The cotton was in bloom and you could look out and see those cars winding up coming to that site. And that was it was extraordinary. And you talk about the feeling, it's very emotional because it feels as though you're standing on hallowed ground. So I certainly can understand and certainly understand the particularly Reverend Parker's, the feelings he might feel being one of the last persons to see Emmett Till alive on the night that he was kidnapped from his grandfather's home. Well, I don't see any questions coming through, so I will invite. You do? Okay.
There has also been legislature introduced by Senator Burr from Kansas and Senator Cory Booker for Mamie Till and Emmett Till to receive the Congressional Gold Medal. That bill has been introduced also.
Very good. We'll keep our eye on that. I do have one question. And this is coming from Bonnie. We have tremendous racial disparities and systemic racism in Chicago. What would you say about why Chicagoans should support advocacy efforts in Mississippi?
Well, many, many, many Chicagoans, as with myself, our roots are Mississippi. It's the land of my nativity. My parents were born in Mississippi and I still own property in Mississippi. So we have a tie, we have an emotional tie. We have spiritual ties with Mississippi, many Chicagoans, as they do ties at other places, but you've got a lot of Mississippians in Chicago.
That's right. The roots run deep.
They run deep.
Mm-hmm.
I think as Ty said earlier that he has family members, of course, in Mississippi. You'd be hard pressed not to find a person in Mississippi, particularly African American, without a family member in Chicago. So Ty, can you speak to this question? Why should people in Chicago care or be concerned with supporting advocacy efforts in Mississippi?
I think on two levels, Chicagoans should care. One, you already mentioned, because there's a blood tie to community members in these low-income communities, especially the Mississippi Delta. Let's not forget that Mississippi has the highest percentage of Black people in a state in the country. And the Mississippi Delta is the region in the country with the highest percentage of Black people. And a lot of those relatives from those Black people live in places like Chicago. And a second reason why I think Chicagoans have a vested interest in places like the Mississippi Delta is because of another area in which the Mississippi Center for Justice works, air property. A lot of local family members that remained in Mississippi during the Great Migration, a lot of local Black people, they are still living on that land that Chicagoans, Black Chicagoans with ties to Mississippi are tied to through air property. So it benefits Chicagoans to make sure that these people are getting the legal representation that places like the Mississippi Center for Justice is providing, specifically with regard to the great air property work that's going on at the Mississippi Center for Justice. I know because you're about to do some work for my family in Mississippi that's tied to some family members in Chicago. So it's a circular reward or a benefit to community members.
You're exactly right. And I would point out too, before I move to the next question, that, generally what happens in Mississippi, they say that, there it goes in Mississippi, so it goes across the nation. So if it happens in Mississippi, you can either, you can either see it on a larger scale across the nation. I say that, what happens in Mississippi, it's just a different suit in a different place. So one example of that, I guess, keeping our eye on the recent, on the abortion case that the Supreme Court is going to hear, that that could impact many states across the nation. I have a couple of other questions. Let me get to this one. Coming from Robert Holtz. So much of these issues are shrouded, veiled, and out of sight. So bringing these issues into the light is key. What is MCJ's communication plan for Chicago? I think that would be a question that I can answer. And this is part of it. Part of our plan is connecting with people across the United States, various regions, to expose, to disclose our work, to bring people into Mississippi by connecting them with the work that we've undertaken. So that is one part of the plan. And of course, by connecting with each person that is on this particular event, and making that 6th degree even smaller, that helps to expand our reach in connecting with other individuals, other partners and organizations. And we host several other events. Now, of course, because of the pandemic, those events are virtual, which has been in some ways good, because we're able to connect with more people. Whereas we would host our event that you'll hear about a little later, the Mississippi on the Potomac, which has been historically an event held in DC in the spring. We've been fortunate enough to bring that event virtually, and that expands from that ballroom in DC to thousands of people across the United States. And the same occurs with our fall event, the Champions of Justice event, that was regional, but now we're able to extend that across the United States and connect with people who without knowledge of Mississippi or MCJ. So thank you for that question. I have one last question. I think that was it. If we have I don't see any other questions in the chat box, and we are have neared our time toward closing our event. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and I especially want to thank our host, who I want to bring forward. I want to ask Bunny Allen and Aviva Futorian to please join me here, and I'd like to hear about your connections with MCJ and why you supported MCJ over these years. Bonnie?
Yeah, well, you know, as Angela mentioned, I spent 7 years in Mississippi working for MCJ, and they were uh, really some of the most meaningful years of my life. I grew up in the South in another Southern state, and have lived in different parts of the country. And when I came to Chicago in 2014, I recognized that the South is not alone in deep-seated racism. We have a lot of issues here in Chicago, a long history of structural racism, violence against Black people, housing discrimination, often touted as the most segregated city in America. But I do, for all the reasons tonight, I think it's important that even we live in a blue state, even though we still have deep racial disparities and really terror, police brutality, and many other forms of it. But it's important for us to pay attention to what's happening in Mississippi, to what's paying attention to what's happening in the South, and to support that. We are blessed in Illinois with a lot of different social justice, legal advocacy organizations. Mississippi doesn't have the same level of resources. And so the Mississippi Center for Justice relies on support. Certainly there are many, many supporters inside Mississippi, but the center relies on support from those of us who have connections in other parts of the country. So I would encourage you all to join me in supporting the center financially, and just to stay connected, to stay tuned in to what's happening at the Center for Justice. This is an incredibly impressive body of work that we just touched on pieces of it tonight. So I just want to thank all of you for virtually visiting Chicago. Hopefully next year we can do this in person. And I just want to say thank you, and I'm very proud of the work that you all continue to do.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. It means a lot because I know you've been there. You've had boots on the ground in Mississippi doing this work, and so we appreciate you so very much. We appreciate your support and in extending not only yourself but your knowledge and your guidance to us as we continue to do our work in Mississippi. Thank you so much.
Oh, and one other note that people might not know. So Chicago Lawyers Committee is part of the family of Lawyers Committee affiliates across the country, and the Mississippi Center for Justice is the Deep South affiliate of the Lawyers Committee, and that's another really important connection.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We're webbed, we are interconnected. We're connected, and it's important to stay connected to do this work, because it can be difficult, it can be overwhelming, but to have that connection and that support, and even just the historical legacy of that is encouraging as we move this work forward for sustainable change, particularly in Mississippi. Aviva?
As you stated, I worked for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Northern Mississippi in 1964 and 65. And as a result of that experience, I decided to become a lawyer. And during my second summer of law school, I became a legal intern for one of the group of lawyers that came down to Mississippi to challenge the extremely discriminatory laws that Mississippi had and has been pretty well known for. And one of those groups, by the way, was known as the President's Committee on Civil Rights, which is now part of the Chicago Committee on Civil Rights. I always regretted that after that summer and after the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, aggressive challenges to Mississippi's still unconscionable legal system seemed to fade. That is, until MCJ was established. And I see MCJ as a true descendant of the 1960s civil rights lawyers. As you've heard tonight, there's still much work that remains to be done, and the more support I and my friends can make to MCJ, the more work in more parts of Mississippi MCJ will be able to undertake. I'm particularly interested in seeing them expand their legal work to northern Mississippi, the hill country, where I still have many friends. So I'm still very attached to supporting help in Mississippi.
Thank you so much, Aviva. And like you, I know you spent a lot of time in the Hill Country. I am originally from the Hill Country, Northeast Mississippi, and I want you to know that we are making great strides at connecting with that end of the state in making sure that we're providing legal education and information to people to help elevate or their voice in the community in protecting their rights. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for extending yourself as well to our efforts and connecting us with your friends in Chicago. So our connections are getting stronger. So thanks to you and to Bonnie. I hope each of you have enjoyed our presentation this evening. As you can see, we are fortunate to have a star lineup of some of the best legal minds around, and we would love for you to be a part of the advancement of racial and economic justice in Mississippi. So I invite you to visit our website at www.mscenterforjustice.org to learn more about our work and how you can support the extraordinary work that we're doing every day in Mississippi to bring sustainable change, supporting the advancement of racial, economic, and social justice in Mississippi. You know, the challenges that we face sometimes are insurmountable, but they are conquerable with passion, hard work, and the right resources. You all know, as well as I do, that the law is a powerful tool for making change. And we can make that change with your help. It takes a village, and it takes the right resources in that village to make sustainable change. Our efforts, past, present, and future, simply would not be possible without the support of wonderful donors like this evening's host and many of you. We hope that you'll join us for our upcoming annual event, the Mississippi on the Potomac, which is June 17th, for more programming about our work and featuring this year Mississippi watercolor artist Wyatt Waters. And we are honoring Nan Aaron of the Alliance for Justice and Congressman Jamie Raskin. So please join us for that event on June 17th, and it is virtual. So if you come to our website and register, you can be a part of that great evening. So again, we're also grateful to each of you for joining us this evening. Good night.